It's always faster to trick people than it is to try and find a vulnerability if people are patching things, because it's low-hanging fruit, and people are usually the easier thing to trick, especially in larger organizations when there's a lot of options. I'd say 75 to 90% of all executed hacks would have a social engineering component, just because hackers don't go for the most difficult option first. No one does. That would be dumb.
How do people like us, with a drive to excel and a belief in our own agency, navigate life's complexities? How do we sift through the vast sea of knowledge to find actionable insights in areas like habits, health, wealth, and relationships? Come with me as I interview intellectuals and all-stars to refine life's ungoogleable lessons. I save you time and effort by finding the best of life's messy questions in this podcast to give you the answers. My name is Blake Bottrell, and this is the Distilled Podcast. My guest today successfully pulled off what someone in the gaming world might call a clever use of game mechanics. After successfully wiretapping the FBI and Secret Service through fake Google Maps listings, he has spent the better part of a decade teaching individuals and business leaders about the importance of information security. A security advisor to legends like Mark Cuban or John McAfee, and a cybersecurity keynote speaker in almost a dozen countries, he has established himself as one of the world's leading authorities in online safety. Bryan Seely, thank you for your service. Welcome to the show.
Thank you for having me. You are one of the first people to do their own intro and didn't ask to read whatever stock intro somebody provided. So well done on that.
That is absolutely my job. If you're going to honor me with an hour of your time, it's my job to do the research to find out all the information about you. So,
well, it's there's not too much secrets left at this point, but yeah, I'm pretty open about most stuff.
So I want to set the stakes a little bit for people to understand the importance of the conversation that we're going to have today. And so I was hoping you might be able to share a little bit about how it's possible to reverse engineer a social security number in basically less than a minute with a couple of key pieces of information.
Oh, so you watched the LifeLock commercial. Did your homework. All right. So it actually doesn't apply to me, which is weird because I was born in Japan.
Me either. I'm a dual citizen, Canada, US, but I was born in Canada. So
when did you get? Which did you get first?
Canadian.
There you go. I have at least half a dozen cousins who are born and raised in Canada, either in Toronto or they were in Calgary and all over the place. So same sort of situation. My whole family is fairly international. That being said, what I was referring to with the LifeLock, I'm in the new LifeLock commercial, and one of the demos that has aired so far was looking at social security numbers and the way they're constructed. And people think the whole thing as a whole is something to keep private, but we end up giving up the last four of it, very similar to a credit card number. It's verify the last four of your credit card to authorize this transaction or whatever. But the first five are not random. They're state by state, fairly predictable from low numbers on the East Coast to higher numbers on the West. It's not always perfect. But if you have a 9, 7, 8 in the first slot, you're probably California, Oregon, or Washington. Something like that. Maybe some sixes too. Delaware being 220 or 221. And then depending on what year you were born, it could be the next digits kind of correspond with year. And so with a little bit of open source intelligence, you can find out a lot about a person, enough to find out what a good guess of their social is. And then you could probably pull off a trick, which is dude, I know your social's 9254 is the last four. Be that's wrong. It's 5400. And be yeah, you're an idiot. Now you just gave it those types of, we see them in TV and movies. So not everyone's going to fall for the same tricks, but it only takes once, right?
And you think about the first two things that everybody puts on their Facebook profile is their date of birth and where they were born, right? And so pretty much everybody online, if you're born after 1985 has, well, I shouldn't say that because the younger people don't use Facebook anymore, but anybody in that
yeah,
window,
I found that out recently too. That's pretty funny. What do you? It's you have Facebook? Are you old? You're oh, I guess.
Yeah. So, like you said, open source engineering, it doesn't take much. And then the other aspect of that is the sort of social engineering part of it. What percentage of vulnerabilities, if you had a guess, were social engineering versus code execution?
It's probably a lot more than you'd think, because it is very difficult to pull off some of the bigger hacks that have ever happened without using social engineering. I've seen reports as high as 90% of vectors, like attack vectors, include email phishing being one of the biggest targets still at this point. So if you're a teenager, or at least back when I was a teenager, and there was things called LimeWire and these other very similar like torrents and places where you could get movies, and they weren't all available for streaming. You'd have to download everything. I remember how long it took to download one MP3, and the average was like 3 to 5 megabytes, and that was it. Would if it would take about a minute, we'd be like, "Woo!" It's evolved a lot, but yeah, it's always faster to trick people than it is to try and find a vulnerability if people are patching things, because it's low hanging fruit, and people are usually the easier thing to trick, especially in larger organizations when there's a lot of options. I'd say 75 to 90% of all executed hacks would have a social engineering component, just because hackers don't go for the most difficult option first. No one does. That would be dumb.
What are people getting most wrong about their personal online safety?
Probably the same password for everything, using real questions for recovery options, using the same phone number is going to be another piece of advice I don't see often, but one that's kind of come up just through experience is if you set up for your like Bank of America, Wells Fargo, Chase Bank, give them a different phone number that you get, like a Google Voice, get a burner with like Mint Mobile, something that's permanent-ish that you can hold on to for a long time. That's not going to be another $100 a month or something, right? And the reason behind that is this, and you can use this sort of methodology to use this for a lot of different things, but if I need to break into if I notice you have a checkbook on during a Twitch stream and it's got Wells Fargo on, okay, now I know you have Wells Fargo. Now I can go and look at all the different white pages for your full name. And then now I can find out, okay, he might have lived here, he might have lived here, he might have lived here. So now I have your address, I have your full name, I probably can get your birthday and everything else through white pages and free searches. That doesn't even include paid searches. So now I know all of that information and I don't have to worry about some of those variables. I can probably assume your phone number is also the recovery phone number for your bank. Now, that's why crypto gets stolen, is people use their phone number for a text message verification instead of using an app for the 2FA. Why that's relevant is people will bribe someone at the phone company, and most phone companies will say, well, that's not possible. Well, it happens. I mean, I don't know how the squirrel got in this locked room without a door or a window, but it's in here. You tell me. It's magic? I mean, I'm not the wizard. Somebody else is. Now, if you use a different phone number, they can't guess it. They can't try to figure out what the full thing is. And if you try to use like a recovery feature at Gmail, it'll ask you to fill in the phone number when you use a phone number as the backup. It'll go, what's the rest of this? Or what, complete the puzzle. Because we're not trying to give up information in the recovery process to people so that they can use logic to attempt it. Because people are going to try some insane things to get access to things, especially when the reward is really high. If they know you've been bragging about having a ton of crypto, what are you doing? Go watch Parks and Rec. Watch Ron Burgundy's policy on hiding gold. Like, he doesn't tell anybody where he hides his gold, and he buries it. It's just really, really amusing, the level of paranoia. But sometimes you got to get to that point, because with everyone on the internet, being able to see everyone else on the internet, essentially, if you get into the right Discord server, chat room, everyone can communicate. You're going to run into people with a varying set of morals and ethics. And some people are pretending to be old. Some people are pretending to be young. Some people are pretending to be male, female, non-binary, gender fluid, whatever. And you don't know why someone's doing what they're doing. And you'll never really be able to know. So the least amount of information you give, the better. I use a fake birthday because I'm vain and I like to make myself, it's just a completely different date. It has nothing to do with being younger or older. It's just so people won't be able to guess it. Otherwise, if you get any sort of notoriety whatsoever, like you wiretap a federal agency or two, God forbid, People send you drugs in the mail to screw with you. Like I had the DEA and Homeland Security show up at my door because someone sent me a large quantity of GHB. I don't know what that means. I don't know what a large quantity of that is. But if they think you did it, they don't knock.
I'd never even thought about the fact that it's possible to use, and this is a like maybe break the box mentality for other areas of life, but completely falsifying recovery question answers and not giving accurate, because they're framed in a way that is set up to make it so that you have to remember what the thing is, but then they're automatically related to anything that you have in your life. So carrying that out down the line, if someone gets hold of one piece of information, again, coming back to this, they can reverse engineer other parts of that. So that's definitely a piece that I'll consider taking away for sure.
One habit you can do is take a screenshot of the forms once you've filled out the questions. So when you sign up for an email address, it's got your passwords all, dotted out. But you set up the Gmail, the new username, you take a little cut out of that. You take a cut out of the recovery questions and the birth date that you filled in. You save them into a doc and then print that and then put that in a firebox. I mean, it's a bit more work, but how much do you want to keep that account? Like, how is it important? Oh, it's holding money. So yeah, probably important. It's worth printing out 3 pieces of paper. Really, like treating things as important. Same with Instagram or for us oldies, Facebook accounts. Like keeping track of those things, making sure that you have the 2FA on, because otherwise it is a huge business of stealing people's accounts and posting either scam, Bitcoin, crypto scams or whatever on Twitter or whatever it's called now. I don't use it anymore because it's a nightmare over there. But yeah.
Is there you talked about moving your 2FA. 2FA is two-factor authentication for those unfamiliar. Basically just the idea that you have a second source of identification that theoretically has to come from you in order to be able to log into your accounts.
It's based on the principle of 3 different things. Something that you have, which would be a debit card. Something that you know, which is the debit card PIN. And the third one doesn't apply in this case, but it's something that you are. Your biometrics, fingerprint, retina scan, DNA. Those are different ways to validate somebody's identity.
And you talk about moving that 2-factor from a phone number either to a second phone number, like you mentioned, or to they'll have apps. Some people actually have like full offline authenticators that you can get. Is there a product that you have any experience with when it comes to moving things from a phone number to an app or a web app or something of that nature?
Oh, it's super easy to do it now. Most companies offer the app, either Google Authenticator or Microsoft Authenticator, Google's, whatever, Duo Mobile. There's tons of these different apps that have these PIN numbers that change every 60 seconds or whatever. They used to be only offline they look like, I'd say a pager, but no one knows what that is now.
They do look like, I know what you're talking about.
Tamagotchi.
They're little,
let's call it that.
Yeah.
Some little video game with a little screen that has numbers, and it's an RSA product. And that number changes, and you plug that in on top of your password, and that authenticates you. Text messages are insecure and have been insecure for a very long time. If somebody is determined enough, they don't even have to steal your SIM card. If they have the skill set, they can actually intercept it without it. So that's why people don't recommend it. And there's plenty of videos online of people demonstrate. A friend of mine named Dave Kennedy, who's another Marine as well. He's one of the sort of the legends in cybersecurity. Demonstrated it, I think, at a DEF CON or a Black Hat conference in Vegas, where he called in and was able to get a phone number switched over or whatever, because people are vulnerable to this type of thing. So another lady did a presentation where she had an audio playing of a crying baby. And so the person felt bad that there's a crying baby. In the same way, you can actually manipulate ChatGPT into giving you more answers or helping you more. Be like, I am so sorry. I have no fingers. I don't know I can't do this. And he, oh, I'm so sorry. We'll help you out. Like, dude, really? But yeah.
Those provisions are in place for a reason.
Yeah.
I'm hearing a little bit more now about passphrases versus passwords. Is there anything behind that we should be
It's under
aware of?
the simple principle of the longer the password, the better, and the easier for you to remember without having to write it down. That being said, no 1 2 3 4 5 6 7 8 9, no A B C D, nothing like that. It can't be predictable or what, because there are giant databases of passwords. So every time something gets breached, the usernames and passwords get leaked. The passwords all get collected by people, good and bad, and get put into a giant database because it's easier to get all of the things humans have ever written rather than try to predict all the things that they would write. Because languages differ, someone's background differs. I might use Japanese words if my middle name is Japanese. So if I wrote my full name out, you wouldn't be able to find it in an American dictionary. So there's little nuances like that. But the most common ones are admin, administrator, password, password 123, password 123 exclamation point, or May 24 hashtag exclamation point. If anyone ever says pound, you know they're over 40.
I heard something at one point that the sort of 90-day lockout windows that a lot of large companies have are actually counterintuitively not better for password security.
Correct.
Because if people have to reset their password more often, they're more likely to use something that's just the same password with a 1 appended to it, or the same password with an exclamation point or something like that.
That's, you're completely right, because people will start using predictable ones. The problem with things now is there's so many breaches that happen. Not you were getting involved in multiple breaches, whether you know it or not, and your password history is now sort of being attributed to you, and they can see how you think in terms of generating passwords. So they notice if there's patterns, and they'll be able to predict them. If it's longer, if it's the first line of, let's say, a song that you know, that your favorite song, or just some poem, it could be anything. The problem with a lot of websites is they don't allow for long passwords because they haven't kind of updated or gotten to the point where that makes sense for them. But minimum 14 characters. There's a mathematical reason behind it. I don't know the exact numbers on, because it varies based on your graphics card and computing power. But after 14 characters, it becomes mathematically improbable unless you're very, very, very important. Like if the president lost the keys to the nuclear football and decided, oh crap, like it's inside of a little USB thumb drive that got locked with a long password, all of the resources of the federal government might be able to break it at 20 or 19 with a lot of time and a bunch of supercomputers. But I mean, he's not going to get reelected. Let's put it that way. But that's not you. So 14 characters, 15 characters is a good start. Why wouldn't you? If that's the advice, it's like, it's a very binary thing. Either you do it or you don't. And anything under 14 characters, somebody with a regular computer is able to get close to breaking it. If not, break it. At 11 or 12, it's just child's play. It takes a minute. So, yeah.
With the sort of fold in of all these AI products now, it's important to sort of let people know that the voice profile and image of a loved one could very much be coming down the pipeline as part of this whole social engineering attempt at getting your important information. Is there something that we should be thinking about implementing? The idea of having like passphrases or keywords or something with family members seems sort of like dystopian, but is there anything?
It's been around for a lot longer than you think. I think it's Yiddish or Hebrew. It's called Shibboleth, Shibboleth. And it's something, I don't know the word for word quote from it because I'm not sitting around looking at a dictionary, but it's the identification of oneself in a group. So you can prove that you are part of said group based on certain knowledge. So if you say you were a Marine in a bar and I say, okay, when were you a Marine? He was like, I went this year. And I'm like, what was your platoon number? He goes, I don't remember that. Be like, no. And I demonstrated this in a thing. I was in Texas a couple weeks ago, and there's an audience of maybe a few hundred. And I said, any Marines in here? All right, I know you don't want to identify yourself because every time we volunteer, something bad happens, but raise your hand if you're, I just want to ask you one question. What platoon number were you? And the 65-year-old dude remembered he knew what it was. You don't ever forget it. It's the same way in, if you've ever watched Band of Brothers, they demonstrate this pretty well. When they land in Normandy, the paratroopers are in the dark and trying to find out if somebody's a friendly or a foe. And they say, crash, and the other peoples respond with thunder. In the Pacific theater, they used the word Lollapalooza because Japanese people can't say Lollapalooza. And the reason why we say crash and thunder is because Germans can't say crash and thunder the same way that we can, because they don't have that innate, the TH sound and the SH sound. They don't have them natively in German. So it's weaponized language discrimination, I guess you could call it, but not like in a bad way. I mean, it's war. It's not like anyone's, going to HR, but it's been around for a long time to be able to prove who you are and where you're from. And people ask verification questions like, all right, well, what color? And they've done this in the movie Heat. They did it in tons of movies to show when someone's lying or not.
Is there anything that you're aware of that other people should be made aware of in terms of using some of these potential AI products that are coming online in a defensive capacity?
There aren't a ton so if you are in charge of something within an organization that has the capability of AI, it's probably the IT department, and it's just a handful of people, but they're still pretty rudimentary. They're not in charge of the whole thing. You don't have an AI just configuring stuff, and we're not there yet. However, replacing people at jobs, being able to write up, a simple script. I had someone take me to court for some bogus claim, and I was able to use ChatGPT to write several briefs that ended up getting cited almost word for word by the judge, like several weeks later, because it was fairly complex. And it gave me the right answers to the point where a lawyer didn't even have any notes. Like, I don't know. Yeah, there's no changes. That's excellent. Sweet. It's got a lot of utility. However, always verify stuff. There was a talk by Jack Dorsey, the founder of Twitter, recently, and I was watching a few minutes of it. Basically, it's not the most exciting thing for the future, but we're not going to be able to tell the difference between real and fake very, very soon. We're at very realistic looking pictures, but they're not accurate. Like Midjourney has a problem with umbrellas in that I did a bunch of photos and there was a lady holding an umbrella and it goes right through her head. Like, it sticks right out of the top. I mean, it looks flawless. She's pretty. She's wearing a nice summer dress, which is weird because it's raining. And then she's got an umbrella. Like, nah. There's tons of stuff like that. It'll eventually get to a point where even experts and professional skeptics won't be able to tell everything. So you're going to have to verify everything. And people will hopefully keep building tools to combat because you never know why someone's doing the unethical stuff, whether it's to get money, which is usually that, sabotage people. It could be political gain, subversion of another country, which is what we see with Russia and a lot of misinformation campaigns. And it's only going to get more complicated. The voice thing that you asked earlier about, I have an agent who represents me for speaking engagements. And there's a bunch of different bureaus that have tons of speakers. But when they say cybersecurity or anything related, there's a handful of people at each agency. And one of them had someone call her saying her daughter was kidnapped and played her voice on the phone and then put her in the trunk of a car. And then you could hear her in the trunk of the car screaming as it drove away. And that's a nightmare. And it wasn't her. She was on vacation in Mexico with friends. And someone found that out on social media doing research. So unless you are a professional influencer, maybe don't put everyone, maybe have friends only especially for trips. If you're going to post about taking a trip overseas or leaving your house unattended, you can do it when you get home. That way, all of your posts about travel internationally are a couple weeks behind. Doesn't really hurt anything. Gives you time to edit and think twice about posting anything dumb. And also, no one knows your house is completely empty or unoccupied. I had a different engagement where I got to speak to 24, 25 CEOs at a CEO summit that this venture capital firm had, like, owns all these companies, and all the CEOs of the companies came for this private summit. I spent a month phishing all of them, and 75% of them failed badly. And they all took it really well, because during the middle of this PowerPoint, I had a score pop up. It's like 75% of you failed a phishing test. And they're like, we didn't take a phishing test. Like, it wouldn't be a very good phishing test if you knew you were taking it. And then I handed them envelopes I had been printing out and, like, organizing, and all their screenshots of all the, you won a set of tickets to the Arizona Cardinals, the Diamondbacks, the whoever, knowing they liked that team from social media research. So they won tickets. I need to send them to your home. Is your wife coming to the summit with you? Or will there be someone home that can sign for the FedEx package that we're overnighting? Oh, no one's going to be home for like a week. Perfect. Thanks, bro. Like, well done. People get taken off guard, thinking they won something, thinking someone's in trouble, they're in trouble, they're losing money. There's a fear of, there's so many ways to manipulate people. It's hard to have to say, you need to go research about more and more scams, because that's putting a lot of negative stuff in your head. And I wouldn't advocate for watching the news every day at night until you go to bed, because then you're just like, ugh. Like, depending on which channel you hate or watch, you're going to hate a group of people.
Just to sort of hammer that point home, and this ties into another area of expertise of yours, I heard or read a story from you about a woman who fell for a fake Google listing for a locksmith and then came home to an empty house. Can you explain how that happens?
Yeah. So I was doing research for my book, and I was at a locksmith for a new job, getting keys made that were do not duplicate keys. My boss was giving me keys to a data center. And the locksmith, I was just chatting with him while he was making them. And he goes, oh, yeah. I had a case like that where a woman had hired someone off Google Maps. They showed up at the house, made keys, everything's fine. She went on vacation, came home, everything was gone. And the listing was down, which is the whole point of why I did all that. Was if someone can put it on Google or Yelp, but it doesn't actually exist, that's the only place it does exist. The phone number is just a temporary number. And if it's that quick, you can rinse and repeat after scamming people. The reason we have business licenses is for accountability. The reason people get insured and licensed and bonded is for accountability, so that the consumer is protected if somebody decides to be a dickhead and make a career out of this. You have a way of getting recourse, because otherwise consumers are completely victimized, and there's nothing happening to protect them. So that happened. There was an employee at Google who called a locksmith late at night because they locked themselves out of their car, and the guy shows up because she saw it off of a Google ad at the top. It was like $15 lockout special. And the guy shows up and's like, give me $300 or I'm going to steal, like, I'm going to, like, either steal from her, but basically intimidating this person. Like, you need to come up with $300. You're wasting my time. Like, physically intimidating a small woman at Google on campus in the middle of the night all by herself. So she went to an ATM and pulled out money. And how do you, if the ad gets taken down immediately upon the scam being successful, like, what recourse does someone have? And this is a Google employee with falling for Google ads. Like, we trust Google implicitly, and for the most part it works. But that's why when I posted stuff on Google and of the FBI and the Secret Service agent who ended up validating what I was telling him called the number he found on Google, which was mine. And then I played back his conversation. And then he already had no sense of humor, but it went even, down farther. They were not happy.
Going back to the idea of posting your stuff on social a bit late or not at all, There's a long quote from Bo Burnham that I love, and the last line of the quote just says, "I know very little about anything, but I do know that if you can live your life without an audience, you should do it." And I normally refer to that quote in the context of going and living your life not for the validation of other people, but for the excitement of yourself and what you're doing. But I think this inadvertently has a new
It's a very,
meaning
very
in terms
wise
of
thing to say. He is exceptionally smart. I've watched him on a couple of shows, whether it's his actual specials, but there was one that he does up in I think Montreal or Quebec or something. There's a comic. And this is it aired a long time ago, maybe 5-10 years ago. Like Ray Romano and all these other really famous comics are all sitting with an audience sort of all around and all just shooting the shit, talking about comedy. And then he played Art is Dead, which is one of his songs, which is one of my favorites because it's very cynical about like people want to be famous. Why? And then the advantages of it, but advising people if you can be living life without an audience, it's like a drug or really like anything that has a 12-step meeting associated with it is sort of under the principles of if one is too many and 1,000 is never enough. You're always seeking more. There's always a plateau you hit with the same amount last time, whether it's girls or guys or drugs or food. I have been in recovery for a long time for drugs and for alcohol. And it's been over 10 years now for any illegal drug, but it will get you. And fame is very similar to it, except gambling is one of the most insidious. But people want other people's approval, and you can't force people to give it to you. And not everyone's going to like you. And you don't want them to anyways. That's a lot of a hassle. Like, you can't even leave your house. And then your brain gets all screwy, and like, you could be married to the hottest woman on earth. You could be Tiger Woods and have everything, and then you're still cheating on her. Bill Gates got divorced. Like, the richest and most powerful people can't keep marriages together happy if they have everything. Everything, and then everything you've never even heard of or thought of in countries that you've never heard of or that aren't even on the map. And yet it's not working. And the happiest people are sometimes the most poor on average in the world. So they know something we don't.
I think it's important to tie this into the security conversation a little bit, in that everyone from the Tim Ferrisses of the world, who wrote a blog post called 11 Reasons to Not Get Famous, where he outlines 11 horrific reasons why everyone should not get I pulled it up because I was thinking about it while I was reading this. Everything from stalkers, obviously death threats, extortion attempts, kidnapping. Like, in the kidnapping section, he talks about the fact that when he goes overseas now, if he has a driver that comes to pick him up, he has to use a fake name because people will go through and look through ticket bookings and then understand that there's a Tim Ferriss showing up in this country on X date or whatever, and then they will show up to the
airport or go and hack his stuff and figure out he's probably going to stay in one of these hotels, and then they can go and get information about him or even get into his hotel room.
Yeah.
And you never, like, people are more cynical in New York City than they are in Oklahoma. The same thing applies to other countries. Some countries just assume you're not going to be scamming people. They'll like, honestly, oh wow, you've got really good intentions. Obviously, like, no, not obviously. So yeah, no, he's right. I have 4 clients right now who have stalking problems. One of whom was actually one recently sort of is not in need of it anymore, but she's quite famous. Father's one of the most famous comedians ever. So it's a problem, and it's a weird problem that you don't know is going to have. David Spade's assistant tried to kill him, like in his bedroom in the middle of the night, like weird. Like, and there's a lot of people who've had similar experiences, and it's not something that we don't always share the most awful stuff in our lives because it's a bummer, and it's not always the appropriate time because sometimes it's just a quick thing. Like, you can't always get into it, but we need that outlet, and people need to know those stories because they need to know, other people have been dealing with it. It's not, and there's other solutions out there and like how to deal with it. But not everyone needs to know how to deal with an online stalker either.
I'm sure there's no shortage of people who become sort of semi-famous on Instagram or TikTok and acquire a stalker one way or another. 1 to 5% of the population is psychopaths. But to sort of, again, hit this home for people who think they're just an everyday person, and they're posting their kids on their Instagram so that grandma and grandpa can keep up with what's going on. And I've heard some horrific stories, and not to scare people, but to make them understand this is the world that we live in on the outliers, is that if you're posting about your kids on Instagram, there are people out there that can use that information and say you posted about this kid's or a relative's like birthday party and the kids are there or something. Someone can walk up to your kid who's just looking at your open Instagram profile, whether they're at a place, wherever it is, you take your eyes off your kid for half a second, and they walk up and say, "Oh, hey, I'm your mom's friend from such and such. We met at this party. Do you remember me? Your mom asked me to come pick you up." Your kid doesn't know the difference between whether someone looking at your mom's Instagram is a friend or not a friend. Like, that doesn't even register to them when they're 5 or 6 years old, right?
Right. That's back to the Shibboleth thing that I was talking about. There is a time when I think parents should be talking to their kids about online scams and phishing scams. And yeah, the kid will be like, "This isn't even important. I don't even want to I don't even use that." I don't like. Okay, sometimes they'll have that attitude towards something like, "Oh, I don't really want to watch this movie." Fine, choose your battles. This is one subject where you don't let up and you be like, "Look, this is really important." It happens a lot more often than people think, but I don't know it differs between what age they're ready for information like this. I mean, if they get scared of the smallest thing, maybe approach it slower. But having a family password, challenge password or whatever, and it's like, if I say this phrase, now having one conversation isn't enough. Writing it down and then showing them like a whiteboard or like a poster, and then revisiting it a couple times, and then asking them, "What's the family password? What do you need to say to me on the phone to tell me you're in crisis, but you can't tell me you're in crisis? Hey, Dad, did my Amazon package arrive?" Something like that. Or, "Hey, who won the game?" Anything like that, where you can get a message across where the kid knows how to answer, and even if they're compromised or something else. Or if someone comes up and says, "Hey, your mom's asked me to come pick you up from work. She got tied up." Okay, what's the password? "Well, I don't know it." Bye. Run and find another adult, because yes, strangers are scary, but there's enough I've seen enough news stories where some kid runs into a store and be like, "This lady's following me, help." And the adult in question's like, "Oh, F that." Like, I think most people would do the same. So I've had personal experience I have a foster kid. She was 15 when I took her in. As a single parent, she was trafficked at 16. She was gone for about 6 weeks. And so I know how important it is and what the fear looks like when that worst case scenario comes true. And no one's ready for it. It'll definitely, I mean, there's no meetups or like Facebook groups or, whatever old people use nowadays for like parents of trafficked kids. Like, that's a really huge bummer. I don't want to go to that group. That sounds awful. But there are a lot of parents who've gone through that kind of thing. Kid goes missing. For one reason or another. It's important. It's worth having a conversation with your kids, even if it's a little bit uncomfortable. Go do your research. That'll make it easier for you. You're not supposed to be raising your kids to be your friends and not deliver bad news. That's not your job, in my opinion. But I'm not going to judge you for raising your kids differently. That's not my job either.
All that is to say, maybe find a different way of keeping grandma and grandpa updated on the kids instead of posting on your public Instagram account.
Right. There's privacy settings that you can definitely change so that everyone can see them, but they're not going out to everybody. There's a company that wants to make a documentary about me, and I'm trying to think of funny ways to include my children, but maybe hire actors, and then every so often just change them. Be like, my kid was misbehaving, so I just recast her. And like, do something silly. I'd be like, "No, I don't like your attitude. Ding, and then you just like blur her out. You're blurry. Go to your room.
Have you been paying attention to any of the Kids Online Safety Act stuff?
I've heard a bit about it. I haven't. I definitely need to catch up on it. What was notable about it?
They're just everything from just making sure that companies can't have access to your kids after hours to implementing actual age restrictions on things versus the, hey, are you 18? Click here. Yeah. Okay. Uh, all the way down to
that worked for my entire life. Every website was like, well, I can't lie here. Ridiculous.
But yeah, I think it's I haven't read Jonathan Haidt's new book, but I'm excited to sort of dig into it on the anxious generation and his sort of 4 rules behind kids and technology use, and how the increase in anxiety and depression is sort of linked as a causal factor, or back up, I shouldn't say causal factor, as a correlated factor to online and social media and all these different things.
Do we know for sure it's not a causal factor? Because I've seen enough studies to where it's pretty clear. It's pretty clear that usage of Instagram and Facebook or in social media, especially in not to be binary about it, but the studies are on girls of a certain age versus boys. Yeah. It is different. The suicide rates go up. However, not to say boys aren't as affected, the suicide rates for men are way higher, even though the attempts are higher in women. I have a boy who's a very he/him, and then I have a girl who's kind of inattentive and also anxious, but voluntarily got off Instagram for a while without even me mentioning it after watching a documentary, and knows how social media affects her and wants to do something about it, doesn't want to ask, it's very, go watch Inside Out 2. It's like the kid going through puberty and then all these new emotions show up and it's like, wow, this is, somebody knew what they were doing when they made this. But it's heartbreaking. These kids have the coping skills, their brains aren't fully developed. They have no idea what the ideal is. They're just trying to not look stupid, trying to not be humiliated in front of their peers. And if you're, the only thing you can do as a parent is change what environment they're in. Really, after they're 13 or 14, your ability to shape their personality is basically at zero. So you could basically choose where you live and then the friends they hang out with by extension. So if they're around a bunch of kids who are doing drugs now, that's game over. It doesn't go another direction.
Yeah, I think everybody who's looking at it anecdotally is sort of very aware that there is likely some causal factors there, but I don't know that there's been any academic enough nothing academic enough to move the needle in terms of actually getting legislation passed. That's
we don't have anybody in Congress or the Senate doing anything but lining their own pocket. So what is the average age? 65? It's all 60-year-olds and above, and there's basically a wealth transfer. Like the thing that drove me crazy the most recently was, if you're older than 65, you can get free college classes at college. When they went to school, it was like $1. Like you could get a high school education and raise a family of 4, and now you can't. Like the math is just very, very obvious. People don't, you have it easier than we did as kids. Yeah, well, we have the internet and everyone has a refrigerator and an iPhone, but I'll never own a home because you guys own 4 of them or 17 of them. And like, you're worried about your retirement and Social Security, so you vote people in who are caring about you and don't care about us. People now at 30 have less money than their parents at 30. So we are doing worse than the generations before us. And that's the first time it's ever happened in human history. It doesn't seem like a good trend. I can see why people get a little like, well, F it. I'm not, why even participate? You mean go be loyal for a company that'll fire me the second they feel like it? Even if they're profitable, they'll still fire you?
Yeah, I think I was listening to a couple of separate podcasts. Scott Galloway's been on a tour the last few weeks.
Good year. So. You heard? Yeah, You can tell when someone's got a book coming out and their publicist does the same stuff, right?
Yeah, they've been on. He's been on the podcast tour. Simon Sinek, Rich Roll. Yeah, he did a separate keynote too. I think like a 45-minute long keynote somewhere talking about it. And yeah, it's been just crazy to see the. I really do my best to fight against some of the cynicism of the internet, but it's hard sometimes when you listen to all the stuff like Scott talks about in terms of where we are versus where our parents were.
It's not necessarily their fault either. They had it more difficult in certain ways. My kids have never been spanked. I've had my two oldest, my 15-year-old and my 9-year-old, since they were 7 and 1, full time. They've never been spanked. I don't yell at them. I don't shame them. I watch Brené Brown religiously. I love that woman. Anyone who does like teaching or compelling behavior through shame doesn't work. Shouldn't work. My youngest sister came out a few years ago as transgender, and told me first before everyone else in the family, because I'm the most woke, apparently, despite looking like I own a lot of guns and would vote for the other side. I know what I look like. It's okay. I'm 6'4". I still have a haircut like I was in the Marine Corps. But I said, woke? I have narcolepsy. Is that a disability slur? How dare you, sir? After this, I'm going to go take a nap, and then I'm going to get writing a very serious letter. No, just people take the internet too seriously when they shouldn't. Yeah, Craig Ferguson was on a pilot's podcast with a buddy of his who's a pilot. He's been a pilot for a long time, famous comedian. He goes, the internet is something that'll be deadly if you take it too seriously, and being a pilot is something that'll be deadly if you don't. Very good, very apropos, knowing what level of importance stuff is. If you get anxious, write down your feelings, try to live in the present. What I figured out what works is try to be helpful to somebody else. Go serve someone else. That's one of the biggest life hacks that I have all these things that I'd like to ruminate on and not actually do anything to solve, because it makes me feel better to just spin and spin and spin. It makes me feel like I'm not just, it's out of my control. It's probably out of your control. If you don't know what that feels like, have a child and then try to get them to eat a sandwich they don't want to eat. Good luck. That'll bring you down a few levels, because you can spin yourself completely out of control and burst veins in your forehead, and they still won't eat it. Like, no. It doesn't matter if you're famous. It doesn't matter if you're the president. Nothing. Your kids don't give an F. They don't. They're not going to eat it. They're that stubborn. They don't know. They have no concept. So consider all of that, because you don't have as much control over other people as you think. You have control of your own reactions, your own emotions, and how you behave and how you show up. And if it's too much, just sign out. It's it. You don't have to be there. I promise. It would be more amazing if you went to the gym instead of scrolling Instagram, and then 6 months later you show up and all your friends are like, holy crap, what happened? But no one does that, because we've got these weird dopamine sort of addicted cycle habits, and life's hard.
I put a quote in my newsletter this morning from Michael Singer that says, the truth is that most of life will unfold in accordance with forces far outside your control, regardless of what your mind says about it.
Your ability to put up with change and adapt to change is going to be the greatest predictor of success, because it's not how you want it to be. And trying to make it like you want it to be, it's going to be pain. Really, I've been there. I've tried it. It doesn't work. It doesn't matter how smart you are. Painful. It's going to suck.
Bringing us back to one final sort of security question here, and then we'll round it out. But this is sort of a two-part thing here. Is Google making any strides to improve some of their fake listings online? And yes or no, either way, what are some things that people can be paying attention to watch out for fake listings?
Yes. Google has always been doing probably more than anyone else in terms of fake listings. At the time I wrote the book and gave the TED Talk, locksmiths were still the biggest problem industry. and the most heavily scammed in that space, because the margins for costs for the actual locksmith are really low, but what they can charge is really high. So it's not the same as like a pool cleaner or carpet cleaner, but it's all around businesses that probably don't have a main office and that visit the consumer or service another business somewhere else at their location, not like a restaurant. And always be skeptical of reviews and using reviews as proof of legitimacy. I mean, it can be, but you can go on plenty of Google listings today, and this is saying they're the best. You can still I could find one in a few minutes that has hundreds of paid for reviews that have the user has one review, or you find one with 50 and it's reviewing 50 different carpet cleaners across the tri-state area, or any one of 10 different types of companies sort of in sequence. And then you map those 50 out and then follow to that next company, look at all the users there, map those out, and you start seeing this giant web of account review fraud. So if a product comes out on Amazon tomorrow and it has 10,000 reviews in a week, maybe it's probably not real. People will get reviews for a product and then change the product and change the text and the photo later on and keep the reviews because it's still that original account. All sorts of stuff like that happens. So look for, in this stalking case that I was looking at screenshots of messages people were getting because the person was being impersonated towards friends, and they're like, "Hey, is this you? Well, hey, I lost your contact info. Can you send me your mobile ID?" If you haven't traveled much, you know that other countries speak other languages. And then the way that they speak English, it differs. So people will say aluminum here, and they'll say aluminium in the UK. And they actually have a different spelling for that word. We've actually differentiated the spellings. Some of them still like color and with an OU, but they say mobile ID in the Middle East and in India, because there's a lot of actually Indians in the Middle East. So mobile ID is the way that they identify it. They don't say cell phone number. They don't say they say give me your mobile. But cell phone number is almost exclusively North America, in my uneducated opinion or just experience in travel, but no one's ever said it to me that way. And I grew up living in Japan, so I'm always sort of cognizant of other people's English language ability and what words they're using. And I've always liked accents. So you can kind of tell where someone's from based on listening a little bit. And like, oh, you're from the UK. If you go and watch Simon Sinek's, I think he was on a podcast recently, Diary of a CEO. Go look at his old interviews and old talks, either TED Talk or otherwise, there's other keynotes, and then listen to some of his recent stuff. I have a theory that he's lived in the UK recently for a while because he says certain words with a British accent, and then sometimes he doesn't. Like it's slipping in and out. But he's from New York or from the US. So my theory is that he's spent a lot of time living in the UK and didn't notice, because he tends to be fairly excitable and talk really fast and really passionately about the subject. So he's not really, maybe not noticing that. And you don't end up noticing if you're speaking with a little bit of an accent, especially if you're immersed in it and no one else is noticing. They still think you're speaking American. So yeah, it's paying attention to that little stuff that will identify scams early. You can tell when something's genuine, but you have to spend a little bit more time thinking and using your brain. And not everyone's comfortable doing that.
Bryan, this has been great. I have one final question that I like to ask all of my guests.
By all means.
That's, what's the last opinion or belief that you changed your mind about?
Oh, that's a good question. Where did you get that question from? I watched. I was watching a lot of the hot ones because his interview techniques were really good. But that's a question I heard somewhere that I really, really liked. I think it had something to do with genetically modified food. I didn't have a strong opinion on it. Like I just thought, okay, yeah, GMOs are bad. But it wasn't necessarily the case. And I remember seeing a video with like Bill Nye, the science guy, talking about how he changed his opinion on it based on like learning and having other people come and talk to him about it. Like I know that we've done it with like watermelons to get seedless watermelon, or like grapes or whatever else. And there's plenty of, I mean, it's a sinister way to look at the world that all of these huge food companies are in it to, it's not, there was an old TV show called Captain Planet. It was an animation. If you can go find it on YouTube, you will have such a good time for a few minutes. It's the most eco-terrorism, like destroying the sludge pumping company that's like up the river, and it's like, screw those fish, let's just kill them. It's going to cost us money to recycle this properly. There's a lot of companies, sure, that are like that. There's a lot of companies who aren't, and I don't think the secret would be too hard to keep if there was that much shady stuff going on with genetically modified food. It can make it more resistant to pests, which then means less pesticides. There's lots of things like that. So I've found very few things in the world that fit a blanket statement, which is kind of a blanket statement. It's very similar to the Yoda saying only a Sith deals in absolutes. Dude, you just did it. There's a lot of funny stuff in life, even when people are trying to be serious. So that's one of those things. I don't know. I don't change my opinion that all that often. I don't take hard opinions on most things, because it usually ends up meaning you double down on it instead of learning new or taking in new information. You can be like, well, we've got evidence that your presidential candidate or my presidential candidate is this way. And instead of going, oh, wow, I didn't even see that, people double down and just start calling each other names. And it's like, wow, that was not productive at all. So I don't ever want to be so rigid that I paint myself into a corner, and instead of trying to learn something or be productive about it, I decide to save face. Even if it doesn't even save face, it just looks like it feels better to cling on to a belief that might not be real. Yeah, I don't ever want to be that guy.
Bryan, if we want to purposefully send people to find you online, where should we send them?
You can find me on LinkedIn, which is a really good way. People seem to enjoy that. From a business context, it's a little bit easier to be social than trying Instagram or Facebook. You can look me up on Instagram. I think it's Bryan M. Seely, bryanseely.com. Yeah, LinkedIn's probably the easiest way. You can look me up on YouTube or just Google search. I'm usually the first 10 or 20 results anyways. If you see a bunch of results that make you go, wow, that's ridiculous, that's probably me. I wouldn't do that in my car.
Perfect. I love it. Thank you, sir.
Hey, thank you for having me on. Anytime you have questions or you just run out of interesting guests, I'll happily come back on. I can't always meet the threshold of interesting, but I'll try to be funny.